Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Session, back to the show again. Friend of the show, Adam Hiest. How you doing, Adam?
Awesome, brother. Good to be back on and good to see you again.
You too. So today we're going to be talking, we'll go down memory lane a little bit for the OGs who are on Amazon pre-14, 15, and then the gold rush and then move back through. But the idea of the day is to see how the complexities have changed on Amazon, take a little look back and some of these changes, even with going into COVID, legislations, TOS. And so did you want to kind of map this from a certain date?
Yeah, so I think I've, in terms of like the more public figures in the space, I would say I'm a late entrant. I started kind of paying attention to Amazon via another brand that I didn't start from scratch around 2016, 2017. Started pretty heavily researching it to deploy my own brands, kind of call it late 2018. And then I kind of launched my first brand from scratch 2019. But I've always thought it, especially coming in, I would call it midway through that kind of, escalation of sellers getting into Amazon. Just looking at the eras, right? Like the different dynamics at different moments in time, different, elements of information, different pros and cons. And, as we've talked about, I feel like we're entering a new era of Amazon, kind of coming out of, call it 6 to 12 months post-COVID, different dynamics in the brick and mortar retail environment and kind of where we're at today. So it's fascinating to see things kind of change and develop and the new dynamics at play.
Yeah.
But I kind of look at it like three eras. I look at it like pre-2016, call it 2016 to 2020. And then I'd call it the era that we're kind of emerging into now, 2021, 2022, as being a new era as well. So,
yeah. All right. Where do you want to kick off with? Obviously, you've covered two of those eras. I was in the previous era from 2015. And I mean, literally back then, you would put a product out and it would sell itself to a point. And obviously you had complete access to go after reviews, even with Review Club, even down to I Love to Review and stuff like that. It was very blatant and within terms of service at that point.
Yep.
And people used to sit down and obviously there was software out there to work out star ratings. Do we want to select that reviewer because they've given a lot of 3s or 2 stars, etc., which is probably going to be more the honest end of the spectrum if everyone was to be blatant and honest about it. Why would you go, this is a really good idea. Why don't I contact these reviewers that all give 3 stars? Because you know how much hard work. So people would select the other end of the scales. And I suppose people were incentivized and they worked it out from the customer end receiving these products that you're not going to get anywhere fast if you don't give 4 and 5 stars. Obviously there's adjustments, this could be better, but a blazing really good review and you read their reviews and they could be, I don't know, 500 to 1,000 characters where they've already got into the review and that kind of worked for, well, you want to get so that they're really good in depth and they give you a kind of an objective review of it, but the review is favorable. So that was really one of the key things in 15. Obviously the introduction of Amazon PPC. I mean, it's not like it's even now it's not that complex in terms of the front end when you look at the interface of say Google or Google Ads, and like Facebook, but still, there was a time back then that, you could rank based on PPC, but you wasn't penalized per se if you didn't have a tremendous conversion rate. Yeah. Obviously, you didn't back then have the issues with shipping. There is very little in the way of legislation to get onto Amazon as a moat, in terms of paperwork, insurances, and I know that a lot of people flew under the radar with sales tax whilst they were getting going back then. And then they'll pop their head above the parapet. And then obviously the whole sales tax thing kicked in. Obviously the overall quality of products has changed. And obviously back then, a lot of Me Too products, because softwares were coming out, which encouraged people to shop in a pool of products, in terms of what was available, what was picked up in the filters of the software. And, if you compare the prices of air freight back then and sea shipping and stuff, it's a lot different to now. Now, in that era, that was fantastic. And yes, you could have always sell your business. But this era presents, as we jump forward and then I'll jump back, something completely new in the sense that it's now a trend to sell your business.
Yep.
And back then it was a lot easier to be successful on Amazon, but people got stuck at 7 figures and didn't really know where to go. They could keep going, but they didn't really have an outlet to go after that. They would experiment with Shopify and stuff like that. But it was like back then it was easier to get there, but the exit trend wasn't in sight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
And so that presents its own set of problems in saying is that people forgot about the life cycle of a product. And so I knew a lot of people that back then that were selling on Amazon, they landed right, got good timing and everything else. And then they went and sat on the beach and experimented with other businesses and put it on their Amazon business on auto, if you like.
Yep.
And then what happened is as new people came in and things started to become more sophisticated and product cycles were coming towards the end, instead of pumping the pipeline with more products, they went into defense mode where they're like, well, we need to spend more on advertising. They were trying to get back to where they originally were. But that timeline had passed because the trend of that product has started to reach either it's expired or there are cheap products coming into the market. But I'll go over that era just now because that's an era that you kind of weren't involved in.
Yeah.
I'll let you pick it up from that point onwards,
Yeah. So I think like a couple things, right? I think that, first of all, I think that there's different, there's asymmetry of information and there's different modes at different moments in time in any business cycle, right? Whether you talk about Google ads or Facebook ads or Amazon, brick and mortar retail, the first mover advantage, the benefit of folks there is typically just honestly balls. Like you don't have any information. You have a pretty opaque probability of success because you just don't know what's going to happen. And so to the victor go the spoils. The people that were willing to, chuck down $5,000 and who knew how to get into manufacturing in China back then, who you couldn't find anything on the internet on how to ship stuff effectively. And they captured the market simply because they had balls, right? And then I think as things mature, you get a larger pie. The market share grows. You get more people adding Amazon Prime accounts. The opportunity for top line growth and capturing more revenue and earnings is higher. But then, gets more mature. There's more information available and people are able to make more decisions. And so the competitive dynamics are not first mover advantage. That's not your moat. Your moat is, as things mature, how good is your offer? How good are the dynamics of traffic, impressions, et cetera, that you can kind of flood to a particular listing or channel? So for me, there's like I call it this golden ratio of physical products. And it's whether you're brick and mortar retail, it's whether you D2C on Shopify, it's whether you're Amazon centric, but it's ultimately how many impressions can you get multiplied by conversion rate and then multiplying those conversions by a net margin, right? So you've got to have whoever can get the most impressions the cheapest and whoever can capture the most net margin on those conversions to be, to feed the cash flow cycle of physical products, those people win. Yeah. So if you go back to, pre-internet, it was who could get the buyer at a brick and mortar retailer to get that shelf space. And then you're capturing those impressions pretty inexpensively and you're giving up, wholesale margins to them to be able to do that. And then if we got into D2C, Google ads were super cheap, drop shipping era, Facebook ads were super cheap. You get into the Amazon era, impressions were super cheap. So for me, I think it's like the future era of Amazon sellers, it's harder to get impressions inexpensively, right? That's undoubtedly happening because of ad costs. And if you just look at the ad platform on kind of what is served up for ads versus organic, we've seen that tend to gravitate much more towards ads. I mean, you've got masthead placement on sponsor brand. You've got the 4, sponsored products. You might have 3 or 4 organic listings, and then you've got video ads, Amazon recommended. you could be top 10 on Amazon and still be below the fold now. And so you've got to be creative, I think, now in this new era on how you get impressions to a listing. And I think that you've got to have an offer such that you can command that net margin differential such that you can afford to pay for the ads, you can afford to bring outside traffic, and then you can use that kind of as your Trojan horse to spike organic rank. So I think it's an interesting dynamic. I think for me, I think it's super fun. Like, but if you were, selling in 2010 to 2015, holy shit, that's scary because it's not just this, ballsy on, it's not ballsy entrepreneurship, identify this arbitrage opportunity, slap a logo on it, do something that other people don't have information on and find success. The dynamics of winning are different now in that case. But the pie's way bigger, to your point. You can never sell an Amazon-centric channel business before. Now we're getting into point.
But it wasn't a trend. People were seeing it. So when people see it, it's like, they can do it, so can I.
Yeah. I would also just say too, like the multiples were so low and the cash was so rich because the impressions were super cheap. You'd make more money holding on to your business for 18 months than selling it and just running that cash machine out. I think right now the biggest advantage for people that can be pretty thoughtful about offer and product development, it takes a little bit of time, it's a little bit more sophisticated. For people that can juggle a little bit more of the operational complexity, and for people that can bring in audience and diverse traffic and inexpensive impressions and like impression arbitrage, I call it, you could take a $15,000 to $30,000 investment and be a millionaire in sub 3 years in a way that I don't think you could find anywhere else. So, it's pick your poison, right? Do you want to have an asset and an opportunity like that? Or do you want to have, reverse the time back to 2010 where it was easy? I mean, there's different dynamics at play. I couldn't have been successful in the 2010 era because I'm not a purebred entrepreneur. And I think that, people that were purebred entrepreneurs maybe couldn't be successful in the current era of Amazon. So I think it's different dynamics.
I would say that 2008 to 14 era, there were a lot of people that were grandfathered in.
Yeah.
And so what happened is when this kind of, let's call it the trend of the Amazon FBA community, if you like. Obviously, there was one that was in the Amazon forums, but you had the explosion of Facebook groups and everything else, right? And then the community obviously developed. Podcasts came off the back. Various other channels were YouTube, of course, all of these kind of things. And they come in these cycles and these trends. But most of those guys, we were still sophisticated back then versus the mum and pup stores who sold on Amazon, who were seeing it like eBay. Well, it's just another channel. We'll throw our products up on there, float to the top. They'll sell some units. They've grandfathered in with lots of great reviews, got a good product, of course. And then suddenly things started to change. It's like a lot of people become more sophisticated with this marketing. And then you had the entry of Amazon PPC, which gave people more visibility. There's adjustments there for ranking. And as you got further and further along, they got left behind because suddenly it's like, well, I don't want to spend money on ads.
Yeah.
And because of that, and then when you try and explain to someone, we've had clients come to the agency, like old school clients go, yeah, Amazon's just getting too tough nowadays. We never used to spend any money on ads. And they'll bulk at spending 5-10 grand a month on ads. Going from 0 to 5 to 10 is a massive change. And most people would, wouldn't they? Because it's like a shock factor.
Yeah.
But then when you're baked in at the top, where you're literally on a pay-to-play platform in terms of the top of search, like you said, a lot of organic results are pushed below. Of course, organic still drive a huge chunk of those sales, but your visibility goes down. So when you was in position 2 and 3, nowadays 2 and 3 is a lot different to when it was back then, because obviously it was top of page on desktop and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think like one of the dynamics that I think is super interesting is, and this is why I kind of call it the professional era of Amazon. If you look at kind of COVID, right? I think it was something like it 10x e-commerce, right? I mean, it forced multiplied this insane trajectory towards people shopping online because they had to, they didn't have an option. When COVID kicked off, I was still at a large multi 9-figure brand. We were still, 80+%. I would say, actually, maybe not 80%, like 60, 70% retail across the world. Like our biggest retailer, REI, where we pushed a lot of volume, they came out and said, hey, payment terms are now 6 months. Like, sorry guys, we got to like tighten up our cat. Like, what do you do if you either A, have all of your doors shut down, brick and mortar retail, your payment terms change? Like, a lot of these guys that were centrically around brick and mortar retail were literally forced to go online because they didn't have any other choice. And I think you put into that, you add to that these aggregators. Maybe we can kind of get into the aggregator dynamic and my thoughts on their sophistication. But I call it dumb smart money has been forced into the Amazon space. So you've got all these retailers that had to diversify their channel, or traditional brick and mortar centric physical products brands that, you know, Target wasn't ordering like they did for 6 months. REI, Best Buy, you name the retailer, they weren't getting the same order flow, and they were forced into figuring out Amazon. They have a lot of margins because they built that war chest up through brick and mortar retail. They have branded search that they can tap into and kind of accumulate, but they don't know Amazon. So what do? They go to their agency of record who they pay $1 million a year to. Hey, I know you guys are running our Facebook and Google ads. Can you run our Amazon ads for us too? Yeah, sure, we can do Amazon ads. So they're dumping all this, I call it smart dumb money, but they're not smart. They're not optimized for Amazon. And they don't have that in-house knowledge. And so I think that's been a major driver for ad costs and the different ad dynamics at play, is that you've got these traditional brick and mortar retailers that know that they've got to kind of get into the Amazon game, but they're not sophisticated about it. So they're going to dump a lot of non-accretive ad spend to get that channel going. And that's going to force up CPCs. And this happened with Facebook too, right? Like before it was like a bunch of drop shippers that would sell physical products on Facebook. And then as, you know, other, you know, brands realize, hey, Facebook's a channel, they dumped into Facebook. And then all of a sudden it becomes uneconomic to participate for many brands in Facebook. And I think the same thing for aggregators, right? You've got, and this is not to knock these people, not to knock big brands. I mean, there's a lot of really, really smart people, smarter than you and I, Danny, no offense to us, that are at these places, but they don't have that institutional knowledge of the channel. Maybe they'll figure it out over time. But when you don't have institutional knowledge and are using third parties, or you're trying to figure it out on your own, you've got to waste a lot of money to figure it out. And I think that we're starting to see that at play between larger, you know, branded physical products brands, as well as aggregators in the space that can afford to dump money and lose money and drive up these CPCs.
Yeah. And also part of the drive, which outside of that, but to your point, you still got sellers out there that are still learning. And so when their skin's in the game, they go crazy with PPC because they need to, until that bit of money runs out. And then someone walks in behind them when their money runs out, and then they do the same thing again. And a lot of people's strategy now is for top of search campaigns to help with organic rank. So they burn money at the front end of the product to get it ranking, and then they taper off. So that everyone's at pushing these CPCs up. But if you look at a spread in terms of larger pockets, obviously the aggregators have got more pockets to dip into, or deeper pockets, versus, you know, for every one aggregator, that's like 200 sellers or something burning cash. Do you know what I mean? Doing a similar thing. So it's getting to that stage where it has to be very, very sophisticated now. And normally the benefits will come at that level of sophistication with ads, with your technology or whatever agency that you're using. Tend to be the larger brands with more margin to play with, that can get more data back to make more sophisticated moves in terms of changing their strategy, what works, what doesn't. So if a seller, you guys, spends $1,000 a month on ads versus someone who's spending 10, 20, 30 grand a month, they're not going to get the same level of data to deal with. And obviously, if you're doing 7-8 figures, then 1% are more meaningful than someone doing 5 or 6 figures.
I think it brings up like the question of, okay, well, shit, should we just pack up our tents and get out of Dodge and go, you know, do crypto or some other bullshit? But I think how you win in this dynamic, it's like threefold for me. Number one, I think that thoughtfulness around offer moats, not enough people are talking about. You talked earlier about product life cycles. For me, like historically, and even now to a certain degree, if you've got a winning product, quote unquote, in the Amazon space, I think you've got about a 2-year runway, right? So it's like, you launch it where you're going to probably lose money for 3 months. You're either getting aggressive on price, you're dumping a bunch of money into PPC. You want to get that organic rank. You're trying to figure out what keywords work, what your bids are to optimize things. Month 3 to 6 is kind of like that stable mode. You're probably working on your second, third order. On the back side of that, you're probably cresting into cash flow net positive. And then like month 6 to 24, if you've stuck it and you've done really well, like that's the cash. You're kind of bringing in cash at that point, right? And you're accumulating reviews, you're kind of winning there. But then, enough people figure out what you've done with your offer and what you've done with your strategy. And then, years 1 to 2, you start to see Me Too's coming out, people replicating your offer. And then that leads to margin compression. Maybe you got to battle it out for organic spots. And then you either have to iterate the product in year 2 or you slowly see it decline. And I think that this is what we're seeing with those earlier era sellers is that they were best seller badge for 5 years. They were whatever it was. And now they're starting to see that they've got to iterate or die. But for me, I think that the new, cycle of products, if you're coming in to develop a product, I think that you've got to make it last for 4+ years. And there's a couple of reasons.
That's a challenge in itself.
Yeah. And so you can't, in my view, do a 4+ year product cycle using the old product development strategies. It just doesn't work. And the reason that you've got to be 4+ years is a couple fold. Number one, I think that when you develop an offer such that you want it to last 4+ years, you think differently about how you make the product unique, and you're more thoughtful and more iterative with your factories, with buying molds, getting IP, getting other things together that give you longevity. But the other thing is that, like, look at it like an aggregator, right? When we hear these like 4, 5, 6, 7x multiples, whatever these aggregators are paying, depending on the brand.
Well, it's 7 and 8 that was the last report.
Yeah.
But then multiples are now starting to come down.
Yeah. So let's just keep it simple. Let's say it's 5 on average.
Yeah.
If you're an aggregator and I'm buying Danny McMillan's Ace and XYZ, if I'm paying you 5x for it, what I'm assuming is that the earnings that you've made the previous 12 months, I can replicate for 5 years to make my money back. And then 5-year plus is when I would actually make money. Now, obviously they're thinking, hey, I can actually make more than Danny made. And I can shorten that cycle, but you're effectively paying for 5 years of earnings when you're paying 5x. So guess what? If you've got a product life cycle in historic Amazon era that's 2 years, it doesn't shake out, and the math doesn't work for anybody. And so how you get a product that's 4 or 5+ year product cycle where you can kind of farm those earnings, it comes down to offer development and product development and thinking more thoughtfully about that. And so I think that's dynamic number one. That's absolutely critical that I don't think enough people are thinking about in the Amazon space. I think the other dynamics at play that you need when we talk about impressions, if you're relying on traditional organic and or pay-per-click impressions to kind of get all the dynamics of conversion, that golden ratio that we talked about, it's very difficult to win. And so I think that there's got to be some element of impression arbitrage in addition to this offer development that you've got to bring to the table to really kind of conquer the Amazon channel. And I think how you do that are, if you look at these brick and mortar brands, you look at aggregators that have 30, 40, 50 brands and they're really busy. You've got to get these external, inexpensive traffic sources together to flood those impressions, which also feed the Amazon algorithm, all those things. So I think it's, the people that can build email lists and actually divert that email list to Amazon, the people that can, get influencer fleets together, social channels together and flood that. Because number one, I don't think that the aggregators, at least now, have the capacity to pursue that stuff at scale across all of their brands. They might be able to pick a couple of their winners and do that, but it's difficult for them to do that at scale because it's a lot of work. And I know this being a kind of a branded player before, these big brands that have email lists of 200,000, that have social followings of 1 million, they don't want to send them to Amazon. They want to send them to their .com site because it's much more creative for them, at least on the surface with their math. So their Amazon playbook is ads and branded search. And so I think that there's this nook where if you can have this offer that's designed around 4+ year longevity, you combine, Amazon channel know-how that these other folks don't have the sophistication or time or energy to pursue, and then you can get this impression arbitrage. I think that trifecta is kind of the winning formula for this professional era of Amazon.
Yeah, And just want to touch back, you pulled up a very pertinent thing with regards to when you're selling and the product cycle. I just want to tap into that a little bit more.
Sure.
So given a scenario, let's just say you launched a brand, you're a year in, you've got 12 months trailing, you put out 2 or 3 products, each product 2 months apart, let's just say.
Yep.
So you get 3 to 6 months to get that product going, hopefully faster, but in between that, you've got to find your feet. Could be issues with shipping, delays, restock. You've got to re-up 3 times a year, right? You are already, by the time you sit down and sell, you're into your product cycle.
Yep.
Right. So then the buyer is looking at the trading 12 months. Let's move that up to 18 to 24, right? So then you've covered, maybe we've covered 2 Q4s, depending how you land. So it looks really good, right? And so you sell the business, but effectively there's 6 months to 18 months left on the product life cycle. So the aggregators, the non-operational guys who are finding their feet, are then building teams around the businesses that they're buying. While they're doing that, they're sucking information out of the brand. They may keep the brand on as an ambassador for the brand or someone who's going to help with the smooth transition over. No one knows the brand like the brand owner themselves, the founder. So once you calculate all of that stuff in and you're getting settled into it, your product cycle is coming to an end and you haven't even started to think about manufacturing new products to keep that brand going because you're too busy buying other brands and you need to scale up. So you're busy focusing on bringing people in that may be good managers of brands, but maybe not into that niche. They might be dumped to sportswear and I don't know, some kitchen stuff and something else. So they're not in, these people are not all niched down into the brands, and they may have a catalogue of brands that they oversee with some teams underneath, but they don't have the domain experience that they can spread across all those brands. And like what you said, they're looking to make their earnings back over the next 5 years. I don't know enough information about this, but where is the back end happening? Is there more product development to keep that momentum going? And are they calculating in that? It doesn't matter so much for the seller because the seller's got their money, they're off, right? They're sorted out their family and everything else. New brands start again. So that's why it's important to calculate in. If you have the desire to start again, think about your product cycles and where you hit the peak of that to maximize your return. Bearing in mind, we're in a hot bubble area at the moment as the multiples are starting to come down. It'll still be here for a while, but then we'll go back to 20 aggregators at some point.
100%.
You know, if you look at Prosper, how many lavish aggregator parties this year? None. Yeah. I don't think there is none. Not like sole aggregators. There are parties going on, but not. So you can start to see that people are pinching in where the ad spend, like they're spending their money. So it'd be interesting. By the end of this year, I think we're going to see not the full shakedown, but we're going to see some interesting changes in that market.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think you nailed the dynamics at play, which is, you know, there's the I think we're in the era of the aggregator hangover, and I think it's probably the next 18 months. And so here's what you kind of have, right? You've got it's effectively a financial arbitrage model, right? It's you buy these brands for 3 to 7x. They go on, if you're able to go public or you're able to enter the kind of the private equity tier kind of money valuations, then your valuations are 15 to 30x. So it's like, you know, if you're this Goldman Sachs dude that's and they're like, holy shit, like we just buy a bunch of this stuff up at, call it a net aggregate of 4.5x. And then in 2 years, we've accumulated $200 million and then we go public for 15 to 30x. Easy. And yes, on a spreadsheet, that's how it looks. But there's 2 dynamics that have kind of shifted, I think, that thesis. One is this COVID comp, right? Where you basically have probably the best running 12 months that you could have ever had in most categories on Amazon in the previous 5 years, and probably for the next at least 3-4 years. Where you just have this, again, 10x spike, the competitive dynamics, you didn't have CPCs, like all this stuff. It's very hard to replicate that demand just because it's a little bit of lightning in a bottle in terms of macro dynamics at play. So, the math that we talked about, hey, well, I just got to, I'm paying 5x for this asset. I've got to at least have those earnings play out for 5 years. Ideally, I'm going to actually grow it. Well, what happens when that doesn't even stay steady state, let alone grow, and it drops 30-40% from the previous period? Because of macro stuff and because of, I think, operational complexities that they didn't realize. Well, the math gets ugly quick. And then you layer onto that this like financial arbitrage of, hey, I buy all this asset at 4.5x and then I go public at 15 to 30x. And then your Thrasios and your Perches and all these people basically are bumping into, hey, we can't go public the way that we thought. And so they're now kind of in a rebuild mode to like, hey, we thought we could go public with the mechanics of our business, but we've actually got to, I'm not going to get into details, but like they've got to re kind of accumulate how they've kind of structured their businesses before they can even go public. So they're not going to go public for another, I thought that they would have gone public this Q1, but because of other dynamics, it's probably going to be a year or two before they go public. So
I definitely think like the people that you named there, like I've always been very clear. I think it's amazing having the aggregators into the space because it's made a lot of, set up legacy money for a lot of sellers.
So true.
And I think it's amazing. And I just think all it is that everything, what goes up has to come down, and there's always going to be winners and there's always going to be losers in that race. But that's the race that everyone enters. You go on and sell on Amazon, you win or you lose.
Yep.
There isn't much really in between. You can bump along, but I think the operators are the ones that will win. Perch are great operators, Branded's great operators, Thrasio got good operators. I've met the people there, like super smart. There are, again, Elevate Brands is another one. There's some really good operators out there from what I'm seeing and speaking to, when you can pick up someone's knowledge base from conversations.
Yep.
But then you've got the other guys that have come in who are good at raising money, but they're not operators. And now their spreadsheets, hockey sticks high to the right, are not going the way that they are, or they want to.
Yep. 100%.
So we'll wrap up soon. So if we were to summarize, where do you think it's going next? Meaning, if we see the drop off, like we see that, let's say there's 100 aggregators, it drops to 20. Will we see a drop in cost per click? Do you think that will help, or is it just someone else will step in along the way, like the bigger brands, that use the high street, larger agencies?
Yeah, I mean, it's super tough to predict because, again, you've got these kind of branded traditional brick and mortar retail players that have really stepped into the Amazon channel. But at some point, everybody's got to, sit in a meeting every month if they're, whether it's an aggregator or whether it's these bigger brands, and like show the report. Hey, well, here's our Amazon performance. Here's how much EBITDA we made, net contribution margin. And at some point, you can't come to that table with poor performance for a long enough timeline. So I do think that I would suspect that CPCs do come down to gravity a little bit more. I also think that you've got to think a little bit about Amazon in the sense that they've served up a crap load of real estate in terms of ad real estate. And I think that they've got this weird dynamic where their number one value is customer first. And if you're serving up 60% of the homepage, and on mobile it's like 70% plus, where it's ads, that's going to impact the customer experience. So I think that CPCs will come down because of those two dynamics. And I do think that Amazon has to be really thoughtful about what kind of ad real estate they serve up. So yes, I think that's definitely going to play. I am still super bullish about this because I look at it like your original era sellers, which I wasn't a part of. And I respect the hell out of those guys for their entrepreneurial grit and balls. I mean, it's like, man, I don't have that in me. So I have a lot of respect for those guys. But I think that for the right kind of operator, you've got Chinese sellers that's much more difficult to compete in that environment because their margins are super thin. Your early era Amazon sellers, their playbook doesn't work anymore. And so they're out of the game. And those guys had a pretty good war chest of money. They're exiting and or failing, or they're getting suspended. And their business is
well, they don't understand terms of service because they've not looked at their business properly in the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, you've got these brick and mortar retailers that have flooded into the space and have branded search, and they're always going to win on branded search. But you can steal that branded search, and their price point, because they're oriented around brick and mortar retail and map pricing, they're 30-40% plus of what your price is, because they are not able to be D2C centric. And then you've got these aggregators, many of which have probably bled out, or at least will bleed out a little bit over the next 18 months, because they're starting to have that kind of hangover. So I do think that there's still this position. Again, you got to be super thoughtful about offer. Like, I think that's the golden ticket now. If you can really construct an offer and develop products in a way that's super thoughtful, I think there's still a massive opportunity, because Amazon's grown, 5x over the last 2 years, and I think it's going to continue to hold that position. So yeah, I think that's what's next, man. I'm super excited about it, but there's definitely dynamics that, if you're unaware of them and you're not thoughtful about it, you're going to get your ass kicked. And I think that's where I think a lot of people are scared now, is like, well, crap, what do I do? Well, think about it thoughtfully, like we just did, piece it together. And I think that people that do that effectively, to the victor go the spoils. And when we emerge out of this next era, I think those are the people that are going to have these, 8-figure plus assets that, will sell private equity. And it's not going to just be aggregators that are buying these assets. It's going to be, the future of physical products. So,
yeah. Okay, let's finish that there. We'll be seeing you on May 7th. You're flying to the UK for Seller Sessions Live. So it'd be good to have you in town.
Yep.
Can't announce it yet, but you and I will be in Australia in September, and there'll be further details coming.
Yep.
What else is going on for you at the moment?
I don't know, man. Honestly, like I continue to be like, I've got one brand I'm kind of doubling down on, which has been super exciting. And I've been really thoughtful about these dynamics that we talked about now. So I'm thinking a lot more about the kinds of products I'm going after. I always think that you need to zig where other people zag, and that's where the opportunities and arbitrage are. So I'm looking at stuff. I've always been like higher ticket stuff, but I'm going after really high ticket stuff, $500,000 plus products. I'm looking at big stuff, even FBM stuff, because people are scared shitless about shipping big stuff. I like to go where people are afraid to go. So I'm focusing a lot on that. And I'm focusing a ton on like impression arbitrage. So very much off Amazon impressions, driving that traffic. So I think that's a core focus. Beyond that, for me, man, I'm like, I'm starting to get like advisory equity in a bunch of other brands now. So people that are doing 500,000 to 1.5 million that want to scale to 5-10 million. Kind of getting in the trenches with them. I'm really focused on systems now. I've done a lot of hiring. I think our business has over 300 SOPs, and like, how do I scale systems? How do I do high leverage systems? Things like that. Yeah, man. And just kind of enjoying life, trying to ski and mountain bike every day. That's kind of my core thing, and, build businesses I like with people I like on my terms. That's kind of my go-to.
It's good. And don't forget, everyone, to subscribe to your YouTube channel. You're always putting out content there as well. What's the best way that people can reach you?
Yeah, I like to keep it simple, man. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can reach me. Just go to Adam Hiest on YouTube. Type in Adam Hiest. You'll find my channel. Drop a video a week, and you'll learn more about me, and we'll get to know each other through that forum, and then you'll find out other places to find me from there.
Excellent. Thanks for joining me today, Adam. Guys, take care of yourself and your family. Much love. I'll be back here again tomorrow.